All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Warriors Walk. I'm Keith and this is Todd. And today we're going to be talking about why don't more churches have special needs ministries. So stay tuned. All right. So Todd, you have worked at McLean Bible Church, which we are kind of known in this area for having a lot of quality special needs ministries. We were just talking about this in one of our staff meetings recently, where there's even families that will drive from further distance away because of our special needs ministries here at the church. And so before we dive into kind of the meat of what we're going to be discussing today, you have some personal experience with how a special needs ministry here at the church has impacted your family. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I remember when we moved here many years ago, I was still active duty and I was gone a lot. And all three of my teenagers at the time were volunteering in the special needs ministry called Access with McLean Bible Church. And as you know, I left an island in Alaska where our church population was about 100. And it was a log cabin church, as you could imagine, for a little island in Alaska. But then we arrived in this giant church, and I thought it was a little too big. But then when I saw the kids and just how their heart was moved in serving this ministry, I was like, well, then I think we found our church home, because they were volunteering on Friday nights and Saturdays. Yeah. And as you know, as a dad of one teenager and many on the way, to see your kids thrilled to serve at church, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And that's in essence like why we wanted to talk about this topic today, is kind of continuing on from the previous episodes that we've discussed about next gen ministry. And in our church, Access Ministry is kind of lumped in with next gen ministry, serving with people that are underage. And this is not an exception. Like, we have a thriving Access Ministry at our church. And so if you are part of McLean Bible Church, especially Prince William campus, and you're wanting to get serving, definitely don't overlook the opportunities that are here, which we're going to present today. But also, just kind of generically, like across the board, we have a huge increase of families that have special needs children. In fact, I got some stats from census.gov. So there's a huge need. Over 3 million children, so that's 4.3% of under 18 population in the United States have a disability in 2019. So it's still even 5 years ago, but that was up almost a half a percentage since 2008. So it seems like there's an increasing need. And I think with that too, like, there's an increasing need for churches to help with families that are special needs, because we see that families are impacted with having the children with special needs. In fact, there's some surveys that show, according to Psychology Today, that the rate of divorce in families with a child with disabilities may be as high as 87%. And there's some other stats that show that families with a child with autism is about 80%. So when we see that kind of stuff, and we as a church are saying like, oh, that's not as important, or that's not as a big deal to provide a ministry for these families that are wrestling with this, we would say you're missing a huge opportunity to serve people and to serve that. So what are some stories that you've seen as even your own kids have served in Access here, even some on staff with us at McLean? What are some stories of impact from families that you've seen benefit from a special needs ministry at their local church?
Yeah, how about I'll balance it out. Like, I know one that's humorous with my own daughter, and then I'll share one that's a little more serious. But on the humorous side, for those listening, like serving in Access Ministry, special needs ministry, it definitely requires, the number one thing we're looking for is someone who has a loving heart that cares, right?
Yeah.
Because you are going to make an impact, and it's going to make a difference for these families. But I remember one of my kids, she was leading a respite. And so a respite is, where the parents can actually drop their kids off. And so the typical kids and their special needs kids. And rather than, what we would imagine, they go out on a date, a lot of times they just go home and take a nap, right? They just go home and crash for a couple hours. But one of the volunteers came up to my daughter and said, hey, there's a little boy in the bounce house and he's eating cookies. And my daughter was like, well, we didn't give him any cookies. And so it turns out this young boy was digging out of his diaper and eating what he was finding in his diaper. And so my daughter had to crawl into the bounce house. And when she reached for him, he smacked her in the mouth with his cookies. Oh. And so at one of the staff functions after that, I remember my daughter getting a trophy.
I was going to say, she got a
Beyond the Call of Duty.
Beyond the Call of Duty.
And so So there's the humorous side, but even to that end, my daughter was like, you know what, this matters.
Yeah.
So even though there's body fluids exchange and it was, definitely a memorable event
Yeah.
for her, she's like, Dad, this matters. And so
Mm,
she still hasn't lost her fervor for special needs ministry.
yeah.
And then both my daughters, at different times when they were younger, I mean, they received concussions, they've been hurt, and to the point where I was even hesitant to let them continue serving. But then, like, with tears in their eyes, they're like, Dad, this is so important. Like,
Mm,
parents are picking up their kids and thanking us in tears, saying, like, this is both a husband and wife present. Like, you're saving our marriage.
mm,
Thank you.
yeah.
And so, for a teenage girl to realize their service in the
Mm,
church is impacting a marriage, it made all the world of difference for them. And one of my daughters still serves on staff at our church,
yeah.
and she still loves it. And it doesn't mean there's not hard days, but she knows, like, this is something that matters for eternity.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I think part of the challenge with families with special needs is that they do feel isolated, like they don't have the help that they need, or that if they do have some help, it's usually hired help, like where they, or someone from local government or something like that that's coming in, or where it means so much more when they have a person of the same faith and the same
Mhm.
values as them that are caring for their children, while they can kind of take a break, or we have respite care that's where they can drop them off and as you mentioned, just go on a date or go home and take a nap. But then we also have ministries like on Sunday mornings, for our children with special needs. And so part of that too is I think of even just a recent story from one of our access staff who basically had said that, like, there was a student in their ministry that that couldn't or that had a very difficult time with like dental procedures. It was like
Mhm.
a big deal every single time that they went in for anything related to the dentist. Well, the parents had been praying that this procedure that they had to have done would be okay, like they would run smooth, and they even offered to come. The access staff offered to come and like help them take them to the dentist, and through that, even so, like, just going above and beyond, like, and serving these families, they were able to, just because he knew someone from church, like, was just a lot more at ease, a lot more peace, and walked through the procedure and went very smoothly, to
Mhm.
the point where the family was just blown away by by how much that just presence made a difference in the child's life. So when it comes to even churches that may not be utilizing this opportunity to serve these families, there's a couple reasons, I think. So some of it might just be a lack of awareness and understanding, right? So they don't even know some of the needs that they could be helping with in their community. And so even many church leaders or members, they're just completely unaware. And one of those things that was kind of birthed out of the awareness of a need was our ADDP program, which is
Mhm.
adults with disability daycare program. And in our area, and I'm not sure if this is national or if this is just statewide, but when you get to a certain age, you kind of age out of benefits from care that you can receive from the local county or state. And so there was a huge gap of people still needing care and but not being able to get it. And so we started our I think we have one. Is it every location now, except for Arlington? Or
I believe so.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
accurate.
we have ADDP program that's run by our staff, and it's a way for the adults with disabilities that age out of the government assistance to come and help. And so that was even just a awareness of opportunity. So what are some opportunities that your church could possibly be aware of, like, in the community, and just asking some families to kind of serve. And so some of that, it might just be quality leaders that can help with a very specialized program during your church services, and another
Mhm.
one like what we have for access on Sunday mornings. But then there might be an opportunity to serve even adults with disabilities in your community, like we've developed this program for. Another thing might be resource constraints. We have the ability to develop and devote resources towards serving these families, but other churches might not be able to. So is there any encouragement that you would offer maybe a smaller church or someone that's serving that doesn't have a program like this in their church yet? What are some ways that they can still serve these families without having tons of budget and tons of staffing hours to devote towards this?
The first thing that comes to mind is even what we do in our worship services. So, church leaders listening right now, I would encourage you, like, fold this community into your worship service.
Mhm.
And, yes, there might be a learning curve for the congregants or for the visitors because there might be outbursts or it might be a little more noisy. But I love having our access families and their students in our worship services, right? And one of my favorite students out there, he's the only person on planet Earth that actually knows what I sound like when I sing because he says I sing like an angel. I haven't heard that feedback from anybody else.
And no one else has told
No
you
one
that.
else has told me that, but he has ears that are finely tuned, right? But it's this idea like you could start there, like encourage them to be a part of your worship services.
Yeah.
And then the other part is I would encourage you is like, whether it's reaching out to us at McLean Bible Church or other churches that have access ministries, why reinvent the wheel? Talk to churches that have done it and then figure out how to get volunteers trained up. And then you're right, like there's some churches, maybe they can't afford a full-time staff person, but they can definitely equip some volunteers who have a heart to care, right? Because a lot of times that's what you're doing. You're learning how to deconflict and, transitions is the things I've learned from my kids that have served full-time for over a decade. It's this ideal like transitions are difficult, just like they can be difficult for any child with children or adults with special needs, moving from one space to another without like a good countdown, like, hey, in 5 minutes, we're going to do this. In 3 minutes, we're going to do this. And making them very aware we're about to do something different. We're getting ready to move. Even just those simple skills of helping them transition to another space, just like our worship services, they're very predictable. They know when they have that 3-minute countdown, we have greeting.
Yep.
They see those things that remind them like, okay, I'm getting ready to move to another area. And then it helps them, right? And so those are the things that are near and dear to my heart that I think would be an easy win. The other thing you talked about earlier, though, just government stuff, even something that Fairfax County pulled back on. They were getting ready to make a big change in some laws. And specifically, what I understand they were, and they still are, because they were going to change them in July on us. But because of feedback from the community, they're reevaluating it. A family with special needs, they could either have a caregiver or they could have money to send their child to a program or their student to a program. Well, many of them need both. Many of the students need a full-time caregiver and they need a program. And so once they heard that feedback, they held back on pulling one of them and saying, you have to pick as mom or dad or grandpa or grandma, whoever the legal guardian is. And so even that, being involved in your community and just making the government aware, like there are some students, they need both.
Yeah.
And so being advocates for the special needs community is a big deal. So I just think, being well-read and exploring and researching, but you don't have to figure this out on your own.
Definitely. Well, and also the idea of there could be a fear of inadequacy. So like even a church that's approaching this, trying to develop a program or learn how to serve these families, they might be just overwhelmed by the need or even just how they can actually make a dent. And I think that principle of like do for one what you wish you could do for many. So even if you don't have the capacity to serve thousands of families in your area that are struggling with this, like what are some needs that you can meet just on an individual basis by developing that respite care that you can just provide for the church families that are just to watch their kids while they go and take a break. And so how can you do that safely? And I would just say to start somewhere, just to really start.
We have
even if
all
it's small.
ages. Like we have retired people all the way down to high school and college students. They're volunteering and everything in between. So age isn't an issue. It's just really goes back to, do you have a heart to care and love for somebody?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, we have we discussed about like how churches if they're missing out on this opportunity, like they're doing just that. They're missing out on how they could be serving these families. But what about people that might be watching this or listening to this that they do have a ministry at their church, but they're just not involved? They're kind of on the fence of if they should get involved. What are some things that they might need to know or be prepared for if they're kind of hesitant about starting to serve in special needs ministry?
So one, I believe all churches operate as we do, but I mean, you're going to be background checked just like you're working with a minor. And so even though you may be working with a special needs adult man who's in his 50s, but you still will be background checked, fingerprinted, etc., like that. So that's one step. And rightfully so. We want to make sure we're providing the best people and, certainly keeping the students safe. But I think some of the other attributes to be aware of is just to be aware of, like even when I taught my kids, is situational awareness. Like you also need to protect yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, some of the students, like, my daughters are not very big. And so, if you have a great big guy, he doesn't know how strong he is. And so he could accidentally hurt you. And so
Yeah.
you need to be able to be wise. You don't, even just like not being alone with students,
Mm.
and just having that two-person integrity so that if you do have a problem. So it really becomes, just something where you're aware. And, but I think, again, having volunteered and helped out in various locations and at
Mm.
various times, I think in the end, it's almost like Vacation Bible School. You and I serve, and it's like if you show up with a big heart and you want to have fun,
Yeah.
like that's that's the biggest part of it, right? And then it's also knowing that if a student has a hard day, like it's not about you having fun and watching that movie
Yeah.
that night. It's about caring for this
Yeah.
student, right? And so it's peeling off. And we usually, a lot of times we'll have a quiet room, that's also padded so they can't hurt themselves, and so it's a little safer. And so you can get another volunteer with you, and you can actually spend time with them away from the crowd and really de-escalate those
Yeah.
emotions they're going through. And each student, that's why, each student has a profile, and it's just, again, like, hey, this student does not like loud noises. And so if you bring in this other student, it's going to be a trigger.
Mhm.
So let's separate these two tonight. And so there's lots of different ways you can move out smartly and have a successful respite
Yeah.
or program.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, with my experience, like we've had, so even serving within the Rock or the student ministry at our church, I think because of our, access ministry, like we've had a lot more students even in the Rock that have been on the autism spectrum that have been involved with our programs. And so I feel like when I've talked to other youth leaders that I have more of a exposure to special needs ministry than other churches that I've talked with. And I think that's because of it, because we have such a strong special needs ministry here. And but with that too, like I've realized like sometimes it's just you've got to remain in neutral, like to be flexible. Like you might have expectations, so if you're the type of person that needs to know exactly like what's going to happen next in like a predictable manner, special needs ministry might not be,
For
the
sure.
place, for you. And within that too, just to prepare yourself, like when you are serving in this community, like there's things that can happen that are unpredictable, and it just like having cookies, quote,
Correct.
cookies smashed in your mouth.
Well, it makes me
Yeah.
think of, I remember even when I was leading youth ministry at Tyson's, uh, I had a student, and again, here's a military guy just retired, and this kid kept walking back and forth when I was
Hmm.
preaching. I was like, well, that's pretty disrespectful.
Yeah.
And it took me a while, and I wasn't aware that he had special needs. And then once I realized that, like I dialed back my grumpiness.
Hmm.
And then I also reached out to the staff that led special needs, at our church. And I said, is there any solution? They're like, actually, there's a great one. It's called, I think it was like a leaning chair or something like that. But it was a chair that was missing one leg. And so what it does for people that actually need to pace, when they sit down in it, they constantly have to be moving back and forth to keep it balanced so it doesn't fall over.
Hmm.
But then they can sit. And so once we bought him that chair, he was able to sit during the whole
Yeah.
time for discussion and the message.
Mm.
And it was a $25 chair,
Yeah.
right? It was a simple solution. But if I would have just been the old grump and wasn't willing to learn and
Yeah.
adjust,
Yeah.
then we would have never solved that issue and really made him even more comfortable.
Mm.
Because again, I'm sure he was very aware, people were staring at him as he's walking around and pacing. And then he was able to participate and got more out of it.
Definitely. So when it comes to even Jesus and how he would view the vulnerable and special needs families, like what are some of your thoughts on that? Like when you think of like how we shouldn't just do it because there's a need,
Mm.
but I believe that we should do it because we're followers of Jesus and he'd care for them. But what's your take on that?
Well, the obvious take to me is, I mean, it's like um, they could be perceived. This is, one person's view that they're the least of these, but regardless of how you view them, they're God's children, right?
Mm.
And every one of us should have the humility to know, like, whatever we were born with, and all of us have things that we would love to change about ourselves. But when you think about a child that's born, like those parents love that child no matter
Mm.
what, no matter, hair color, eye color, abilities, disabilities, whatever labels you want to give someone, like they are loved. And then if you think about you and I, and we're parents, and I'm a grandparent now, like regardless of those flaws and how flawed I am and how much I love these children, think how much more God loves them. And so to see them through the eyes of Christ, I
Yeah.
think is primary.
Yeah.
And to just know that they should not be neglected,
Yeah.
right? That they should be cared for. And then it's like, what's the best way to care for them? And then that's where, if you are in a leadership position in a church or a volunteer that cares, be well read, do your research, and figure out ways to do it. And again, that's my encouragement is most of this stuff is written down, and there are churches that are doing it. So you don't have to get that creative.
Yeah.
You just need to do the legwork
Yeah.
and find out the solution, then figure out what you can implement. Because
Yeah.
again, a church of 100 probably isn't going to be able to serve 100 families with special
Yeah.
needs, but they could serve half a dozen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also too, we, yeah, don't overlook that. I mean, these, so of course, there's a wide range of spectrum and and
Very much so.
ability and disability. But when it comes to their even response to the gospel, like we've seen some incredible things, like where it's like, man, we've actually learned some really cool lessons from the Lord, like through these people that we're serving, and then just their ability to comprehend and to say like the most memorize scripture, like to share the gospel, like to even
and bold.
boldly, yeah, exactly. And so I've always been impressed with that with many of people that we've served here.
And we're just for the listeners too. I mean, Keith and I could rattle off dozens of names, but we're being sensitive to not share names, even though like I just have them on the tip of my tongue. But yeah, I can think of some wonderful brothers and sisters in the Lord that have special needs. And I tell you what, if I could measure up to 10% of their ability and their boldness, that would be a great step forward.
Yeah. And so when it comes to how people can get involved with special needs ministry, whether they're going to our church or if they're if they already have a church that has a special needs ministry and they want to get plugged in or involved or help in some way, definitely pray. Pray to see if the Lord would have you joining this. It's not an easy ministry. There's a huge burnout rate. I mean, just because it can be very difficult and unpredictable. But pray to see if the Lord would have you serve for a time in this population and to even see that. One of the ways that you can be praying for our special needs ministry here specifically is they are in need of leaders, which is going to be another action step. Or some of the respite centers or the respite evenings that they have coming up this fall. And also just regular, Sunday mornings. There's even some open staff positions within our church, for ADDP, and access. So, yeah, consider ways that you can be even serving in that way. But then also, so you were talking about pray, serve in some capacity, and then also give financially to special needs ministry. So not just within our church, although you can do that as well, but we have an amazing opportunity to serve people that predominantly aren't believers in our community with Jill's House, which is like an overnight respite center at our Tyson's location. We've seen the ins and outs of that and just seen how effective their ministry is there, the sharing the gospel. But also, what are some other special needs ministries that you would recommend maybe giving financially to if you're not able to serve physically?
One of them is the ARC, and my daughter actually just informed me about this. And ARC is a wonderful one that most of the counties here in Northern Virginia have. And what it does, it really helps with job placement. And so they look at the abilities of the student and they match them with employers that are willing to work with them. And there's nothing like boosting the confidence of that student to give them employment. And so, when we lived down in Virginia Beach, there was one, I forget the exact name of it, but it was something like the Purple Bakery or something like that. But I'm telling you what, like they crushed it, like in all aspects of baking cookies and all the other wonderful baked goods there. And it was all led by just two people. And they employed all these different special needs men and women. And they did a phenomenal job. And people would go out of their way and stand in line to get the baked goods from those men and women.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of ways like that you can certainly participate in the community. But again, I think it's really looking at your area and just doing a little research and even plugging in. Like if you want to find one that's faith-based, be specific, in your search, because there's going to be other government organizations that are going to do different things and maybe even different ways. And so I don't feel comfortable vetting each one of those publicly, but I'll just say, do your research and make sure you feel comfortable supporting who you're going to support.
Yeah. Well, and I think of, everything I've read from her, like Johnny Erickson Tata, and she has is in a special needs camp that she puts on, is like Johnny and Friends.
I think that's right.
Yeah. And so with that too, like I've seen some incredible ministry that they've done as well. We've had people that have worked for that camp and worked for her.
Horse camps local. Yeah. There's so many people. It's almost as many camps that serve veterans with PTSD and some of the other things that they're going through. The special needs communities out there and the camps they have is phenomenal. Yeah. Great resources.
Awesome. All right, so let's transition into some rapid fire questions.
All
So,
right.
of course, you are a retired Navy SEAL, so I'm going to ask you some specific pew pew questions
Pew
when it
pew.
comes to you even taught survival. So, there is a lot of talk these days about survival guns and
Mm.
what is the best survival gun that you've seen so far? Because I feel like there's always a new version that comes out like every couple months that I'm like, you know what, that would probably be the. But what is your opinion the best survival gun?
Wow. Yeah, I think I
And
can't
there's a
remember.
range of thoughts here too, like with caliber and
Sure.
functionality, capacity, legality.
Legality. Do we have to go there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, a personal favorite of mine that I have yet to own, but it's on my wish list for sure, is Wild West Guns in Anchorage, Alaska. Like they have this beautiful 4570 takedown. It's called the Co-Pilot, but it's chambered. You can do Wildcat rounds, and so they have these special souped-up bullets that will knock down anything on planet Earth.
Yeah.
But then it's also chambered to shoot 45 long Colt for just a regular round to take down small, medium-sized game. And then it's also chambered to shoot, like the same gun will also shoot 410 shotgun shells. So you want to shoot some wild fowl, or you want to shoot rabbit and not destroy the animal and
Yeah.
actually have meat to eat. To me, I think that was one of my favorites when I lived in Alaska.
Mm.
And certainly if I had the budget, like I would have folded that away and took it everywhere. I think I remember one old timer up there. He shot everything in the state of Alaska with a 22 Hornet. He had a single shot New England Firearms, like a gun that was worth probably $100
Oh.
with a cheap $50 Tasco scope on there that was always fogged up when I used it, and you could barely see anything through it. But he touted, and I got to witness its takedown power, that pretty much any animal he could shoot through the temple and it would drop them, from bear to moose. I don't recommend going bear hunting with a 22
Yeah.
Hornet round, but the ammo was cheap, and he was a cheap old timer that lived off the land,
Yeah.
and he made his living from the 60s and 70s, skinning out animals. And so you have that adage. I know a lot of people are big fans of 22. I know a lot of people are big fans of 30-06. And this goes into the adages ammo available, right? If you happen to stumble across an old deserted cabin, like what would you most likely find for ammo?
Yeah.
The end of the world scenario type stuff.
Mhm.
And there's a good chance there's some 22 long rifle there, and there's probably a good chance there's some 30-06 ammo or shotgun ammo.
Yeah.
So you start thinking about ammo availability. But as far as, the best survival weapon out there, my goodness, like the internet is a buzz with that
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, I've had friends that they only carry 10 mil, with them, and a Glock, they want
Yeah.
high capacity and they want a super knockdown because if they're in bear country. So you have that adage. But yeah, I would go with the old Co-Pilot,
Yeah.
and if somehow my wife would ever allow me to save up and spend $5,000 on a
So
weapon.
is it a double barrel, or it's the same
No,
barrel that
it's the
so
same
you can shoot
barrel. It can
3
shoot
different rounds?
3 different rounds.
Wow.
So
Was there like a
it's
drop
unique.
in, like are they all
Yeah.
the same
It's
diameter?
all the same.
Yeah, I
It's
have seen
more
those,
for
like
that.
those ones where it's like it's a gun, but in the stock it has like all the different bores, whatever, like that you can
Right.
drop in and then
Right.
use any kind of ammo. I was
That would
like,
be
that's
slick
pretty,
too.
yeah.
I think the problem there is
You
then
limit,
can you
rifling and stuff.
maintain all that ammo,
Yeah,
right? And you're lugging all that around.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I think it just depends on what you're going to do. It goes into the old adage, what's the best knife? It's like, well,
yeah.
what do
It
you want
depends
to do
on,
with
yeah,
it,
yeah,
right? But
yeah,
yeah, and I think that's where it'd be fun to see comments, dropped in too.
yeah,
I'm sure people got opinions on it.
definitely, yeah. Okay, so now what is now when it comes to survivalists, there is a lot out there. Some of them
Oh,
are
man.
more known than others, and
That
we've
doesn't
even
necessarily mean that
yeah,
they're credible, right?
yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're credible, just because they have a big social media following. But what are some, when it comes to Navy SEAL who taught survival, who would you say are some of the most respected survivalists that people might know their names? Because they're
Yeah.
like, if you've read about them in a book, that was written 100 years ago, they might not be as well known on the internet today. But what is?
So there's a wide spectrum, and we could spend hours on this. One guy that I learned from, and he's I would say in the bushcraft world. And so my specialty was the boreal forest. So think, Northwest Alaska, Yukon, that type of terrain. Morris Kachansky, he wrote a book called Bushcraft, and it's pretty simple, but his mentality was like, give me a 4-inch blade knife, and it was like a cheap, blade knife that he would use, an axe and a big, kettle. and he could go conquer the world. And his big thing was, learning how to take down a moose and a rabbit, and knowing the world in that boreal forest, and like he could make it happen. And he was a legend for sure, and he taught many people. He taught at a university, I believe, it was in Alberta. And so Morris Kochanski's on one high end of the bushcraft world. One that we also got to work with, he was on Dual Survival and a lot of other shows. Cody Lundeen. He was the guy that was like the short, stocky, hippie guy. But again, what I liked about Cody was he was a guy that lived it. Like before he wrote his first book, before he did anything, he just grabbed a knife and went out into the wild and lived for a year and just made it happen.
Is this the guy that is barefoot a lot?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of how much I should share about him. But one of the things that's funny, I don't think he would mind me saying this. Well, actually, he might. So maybe I'm trying to. But like, he was interesting to figure out how to pay, because he didn't want the man to know, everything he was doing. So we had to figure out different ways to pay.
Yeah.
But no, he was hilarious, but he had skills to back it up.
Yeah.
And so he teaches out in Arizona. And what's interesting about Arizona for teaching survival is you have all these different climate regions, right? So you could go from freezing cold, and then a day's hike, you could be somewhere that's well over 100 degrees. Yeah. And so he was very fluid in knowing how to adjust to all those environments. Yeah. And so, yeah, and then I think as far as TV personalities, the one that what I liked personally about his teaching style was he showed his failures. So Les Stroud certainly wrote some books, but he was kind of that first generation guy that filmed himself. Yeah. And there was times where, like, obviously the guy has skills and he knows how to make a bow drill. And then he's out there and he's like, I'm exhausted. I can't start a fire. And so I'm just going to curl up and freeze tonight. And hopefully I don't die. Yeah. But like, he would film his failures. And I thought that was pretty cool, because a lot of times you can edit out all that stuff and make yourself look like a shining star. When in fact, I've been out there, and at one point in my life, I was very, I say skilled at doing primitive fire. And in Alaska, when it's been raining for 30 days straight, it's not happening, right? Yeah. And so you're like, that's where you hope you have good clothing and a good shelter, because sometimes you just can't keep that fire going. Yeah. And I'd love to say I got it every time, but there's times it took hours to even get just like this little bitty fire. Yeah. And
so I remember watching a show, but I can't remember what it's called. Les Stroud's. Was it?
Survivorman.
Survivorman. Yeah.
No, it just, again, I think what I liked about his approach, though, was, the humility to show his failures. Because we all know, like, if you're a doer or you're a practitioner, you mess up.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely. So I like that he changed his environments too. Like sometimes it'd be like up in.
Well, sometimes you start with like a broken down car. He's like, this is shelter tonight. I got to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, those are just a sampling, but there's so many out there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit to a reason why you kept a bunch of $1 bills while you were deployed in different countries.
Yeah. Well, specifically one in East Africa. Use your imagination. I remember at one point, and again, this isn't a proven tactic, and I never had to use it, but I had 1,000 $1 bills on me, thinking that I give, worst case, my 4-man team, we found ourselves up against it. If I chuck them up in the air, give us just a few more moments to go hard point somewhere and figure out life. And so that was my insurance policy. I thought it was a brilliant one. I probably didn't think it through that deep, because I imagine that, they would just trace the source of who threw the ones and then just be more motivated to come hunt us down and kill us. Yeah. But in my mind, it made me feel better that I had 1,000.
So if you're in a big crowd and you just throw money in the air,
I was hoping
that might buy you some time.
Thank God I didn't have to test it.
Okay, so that was one survival tip that maybe wasn't proven, but you also have another survival tip for us today. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah, the one I taught. I was fortunate enough to grow up with a grandfather who taught me trapping, and trapping is not a skill you're going to learn overnight, for sure. And there's a lot of complicated gear if you're going to do it professionally. But for someone in a survival situation, I taught the 3 Ps, and let's see if I can remember them. So it was portability, and it was probability, and it was placement. And so it was this ideal of carrying lightweight stuff, making triggers on site. So, if I found a place like, all right, I think this is a good place, then it's thinking about placement, like, is there animal sign? And like, is there is it probable that an animal is going to walk by here? Because if there's no animal sign and it doesn't make sense, you're wasting your time building a trap. You may make a perfect trap and snare type situation, but if no animals are there, you're wasting your time, right? Yeah. And a good example is I taught how to make gill nets to the students in Alaska. And so we make them out of 550 cord, and it's not that complicated to do, but it's time consuming. And we would catch rabbits with them. And I didn't even think about catching rabbits with him until I was mending gill nets at our detachment one time. And I went in for a lunch break. And when I came back out, I had 5 rabbits hanged in my gill net. And I was like, well, there you go. I think a gill net actually would work catching rabbits. Yeah. And so I started teaching that. And I taught it. And then I went and checked. And one of the students was like so pumped. They're like, you need to check out my gill net. And it was a beautiful gill net, but he had laid it flush on the ground. And I was like, so that's not really what I taught you. Like, it needs to be up so they can run into it. And on the ground, they're just going to walk right over it. Yeah. And so you got the portability, something lightweight you can make on the spot. Triggers is what I'm thinking. And then engines is a whole other thing. And this is where I probably need to do a video and teach. But basically, something that creates power, right? And so a lot of times, if I saw a nice path where something was going, but I wanted something to actually bring the game up off the ground so another predator wouldn't eat it, then maybe I would lash a log up high, and then I'd run my 550 cord over that, and then I'd have another big log, obviously heavier than the rabbit or whatever I was targeting. And so I'd pull that down, and then I would set my loop to my trigger on that trail. And so when they would hit it, boom, then that trigger would take off with the log, and then it would hold them up aground 6-7 feet, so a fox or whatever, it'd give me more time. Or even eagles. I've had eagles take rabbits from me, and I was like, so those
like,
are the
thank
3
you for capturing that for
things
me.
that I think are kind of important. And then the portability was like, when it's lightweight, you can take a whole bunch of stuff, right? Where if you have like your actual hardware steel stuff, like you're not going to have that much. And to be honest, no one's going to carry that stuff in an actual survival situation. Yeah. You might carry it if you're actually going out purposely to go live in the bush. But you're not going to accidentally just like, oh, I just happen to have these 5 steel traps with me. Yeah. That's a lot of weight to carry.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much for your survival tip. And that concludes another episode of The Warrior's Walk. And if you are watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please make sure you subscribe so that you won't miss an episode in the future. We've learned that, especially on YouTube, the vast majority of our views come from people that aren't subscribed. And so we want to encourage you to subscribe. The best compliment that you can give us is to share this with other people so that they can be benefited from it as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.